What's going on? This is XNA Zap Chess update number 12, but I'm going to post this video before about 5 other videos I've done. So I've been working on chess. I've done a lot of things for it that I haven't shown you guys yet. Let me pull up a list. Actually, I won't pull it up. I don't have time. But I did all my checks, so I can detect a check from any different type of piece, so from a pawn, from a rook, etc. I have turns now, so white goes first, then red, then black, then blue, and around and around and around. When it's a player's turn, it pops up a little prompt that says it's your turn. Pieces move where they should go. I centered my pieces on the board, so I originally had centered the pawns, and then the queens were a little off, so I changed color around a little bit, so each of the different pieces is centered on the board. When you capture a piece, it turns into a little small piece and goes into the invalid area, and maybe one or two other things I can't think of right now. But I'm not going to show you guys that for now, because I talked to my friend about this, and he really wants to put it on the Xbox Live Marketplace, or whatever they call it, Indie Arcade. So I'm thinking it's not necessarily a good idea right now to show you all the code and how everything works, because I know you sneaky guys out there, you're going to steal it. You're going to steal it and reap all the profits. So, not going to happen. But I started a little side project, so everything I've shown you right now is like 2D, it's all flat, overhead camera view off the board. And so what I've been playing around with is a 3D version of the game. So I'm going to show you guys that, because I've only have like a board and one little piece that I started moving around, so I want to show you guys that. Because not too many trade secrets in this one. So to start with, I guess I'll show you. I made a 3D model using a program called Blender. It's free. I think the website is blender.org. I'm not 100% on that. But it's kind of confusing if you haven't done any 3D modeling before. There's a lot of things here, and there's a lot of options all over the place, and it's a little confusing, but there are a bunch of tutorials out there. I think there are some on Blender's website to help you get started, but basically it starts you out with the shape, and you can manipulate it and do all sorts of things and whatever. So I use this program to create a 3D model or two. I've done a little 3D programming before in the past. I think it was using OpenGL's framework for C++, I think it was. I had never done any 3D modeling in a modeling program, but I had, programmatically created some 3D objects, like you write, I guess it's a C++ program or whatever it was, and you do like new square, and you give it dimensions, and it creates, a square for you, or a cube, based on those dimensions, and then you programmatically scale it and translate it and move it in the world space where you want to put it. And I think you can do that with XNA. You can programmatically create shapes and objects. Obviously, for more complex models, you'll want to use a modeling program and import it in. Same way you do textures or sound effects. You just add it to your content and put those in there. But I think you can do it programmatically within XNA. I haven't found anything to do that yet. I just looked up something that I think is how you do it. So I might try that, because that's a little easier for me, at least for the board, just to create, a square board. It'd be easier for me than trying to figure out how Blender works. But I have created a couple models. I imported them in here. I think XNA only takes in this .fbx format and maybe a .x format also for your models, for your 3D models. And I don't know anything about those formats, but natively Blender doesn't create those formats for you, but Blender can import a bunch of different formats, and then you can export as a .fbx. So if you've already built some 3D models in other modeling programs that XNA isn't natively compatible with, you can hopefully open them up in Blender, which is free, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that. and then export them as a .fbx file. And if you open up one of these .fbx files, I mean, it just opens as a text file, and I guess you can manipulate these and change some dimensions and things like that. I haven't looked at this in too much depth, but you know, it's basically a text file, and you could probably set all these different properties and things like that. But again, I haven't really looked at this, so I don't know. So looking at the game, if you've done any other graphical or 3D modeling type programs, excuse me, then you know you got to set a camera, and you got to set a camera in the world space, you know, XYZ coordinates, and then you can start setting up your scene. You put your models where you want it in that world space, again, the XYZ coordinates. And then you could either start moving around your models, your little 3D models, or you can move around your camera, etc. And you can set up lighting and things like that if you've ever done that before. So I looked at some tutorials and tried to figure out how XNA does its 3D modeling and things, and it's pretty standard, I guess. I mean, you know, I took that programming course a few years ago. I guess it was like 3 or 4 years ago now, for just one semester with the OpenGL, I think it was. And so all my knowledge is coming from that. And I never thought I'd use it, but, you know, here we are. So you set up a model, and this is what gets imported. So just like one of those texture 2Ds, it's going to store your, you know, your file stuff. And then a position, a vector 3, so that's XYZ space. So you want to, where do you want to place your model in the world space? And then you also set up a camera position, so where do you want the camera to be set up? And the camera aim, and these are all just variable names, you can name these whatever you want, and the camera aim is where that camera is pointed. So for my game, I'm not completely done with this, but for my game I want the camera to always be pointed at the middle, and I'm just going to move the camera around, but it'll always be pointed, you know, at the middle of the board. There's no reason to point the camera somewhere else, really. I tried to figure out how to like swivel the camera around that center point, and you know, it takes some math that I haven't done in a long time, you know, cosines and sines and things like that, and I was never particularly good with that to begin with. But I pretty much have it down. Same update method, same, you know, standard methods: load content, initialize, update. I'm taking in keyboard input currently, so up, down, right, and left manipulate the camera, and then I'm also using the WASD keys to manipulate a board piece. So I've got one board piece on the board right now, and so my WASD keys move that secondary model, and I'll show you guys that in a minute. So that's update. And then draw is a little more complicated than a standard, you know, if you're just drawing texture 2Ds, you know, 2D graphics. The draw is a little more complex because you're dealing with all these models and the matrices of, you know, have you transformed your model, have you translated it across the game world, or rotated it, or scaled it, or done any of those things. And so basically this is your model, and I guess models can have multiple meshes. I'm not sure how all that works exactly, but I guess basically if you had, you know, a tree, and the entire tree, that's the first thing that popped in my head, I don't know, and the entire tree is a single model, maybe the tree trunk would be one mesh, and the different limbs would be separate meshes, and then the leaves would be other meshes, and all those meshes together combine to make the one tree model. I think that's basically how that works. And then each of these meshes can have effects, and basically that's, you know, your lighting, where you're placing that piece in the world space, and then this matrix gets transformed by the rotations or translations or so forth and so on. Your view is your camera, so where the camera is, where it's looking at, and some up vector. I guess that's basically the orientation of the camera, if it's upright. And the projection, I don't really know what the projection is, but there's some kind of perspective. I'm not sure how that works. That might just be like how big your game world is, or how big like the room is that you're in, but I haven't really read up on projection. And for some reason, you got to do this stuff for all of your models. So I've got 2 models. So here's my board model, and then here's my chess piece I have. And you just go through all the same things, setting up your meshes and your effects for each of the meshes. And the only thing I found weird about this is the view, because you set up the camera for all your meshes, and that just doesn't make sense to me. You would think you'd only have 1 camera, and you'd only have to set up your camera once, because your camera is not going to change. If you only have 1 camera, even if you have 20 models, you still have 1 camera pointing at all the models. So that's a little weird to me, but so be it. You set up the camera the same for all the models. I don't know what would happen if you set up like different camera positions for each of the models. I don't know how that would work. But let's run this and take a look-see of what I got so far. So here's my chessboard. There's no textures added to these boards yet. I mean, if you've done a 3D modeling, you have your model, and then you lay a texture over your model, which gives it its, look and feel. So I have my model here. If I wanted it to look like a checkboard, I would create a 2D, basically, texture file, and I could lay that texture on my 3D model. So I've got the board, and I've got that little red piece in the middle. That's some ambient coloring I added to make it nice and red. That's not a texture. So using the WASD keys, I can move my little chess piece. And then using the I and O keys, I can zoom in and out along the Z axis. Using my up and down keys, I have it set up to move along the Y axis, so I'm going above it, and then moving below it, my 3D model. And you can kind of see it swivels. It doesn't move straight up and down, and that's just because my camera is still pointed at 0, 0, so when I move it up the Y-axis, it's still looking at the 0, 0 coordinate, 0, 0, 0, I guess. I could change my code to make it, stay flat and just move straight up and down, look, straight. But basically when I'm moving it up, my camera is tilting downwards as it's moving up to still look at 0, 0, 0. And my left and right keys move, that's the math that moves along the X and Z coordinates to basically circle around my board. So let's take a look at that. So see, I'm circling around the board. We can move my little model again to make it look better. So you can see I'm circling around the board there. And I did that using that math, using like cosine times my x-axis and sine times my z-axis to move my camera appropriately to get it to spin around my single area. And that was the hardest thing because, I'm not good with that math. I knew I needed to, if you visualize it, you need to move your camera around the z and x-axes. And if you think about it, it should be the same distance away from the y-axis at all times. So you basically want to rotate it around the y-axis. But how exactly you do that, you do some cosine and sine stuff, and, it's been too long since I've done that. But after searching through Google for a very long time, I finally found something that answered my question. So there you have it, 3D model, 3D camera, world space. I can move some pieces around. I can put pieces on top of my board. And, there's my proof of concept. And it's not too shabby. This might be my last video for a while because I don't really want to show you all my code because, I talked to my friend and he's really interested in putting this thing up on Indie Arcade, and I don't really want to go behind his back and put up all these videos. I don't know. But hopefully I can still put up some more videos about the progress of this as I continue working, and I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.